It was a dark and spooky night. A group of science treasure hunters were exploring a spooky swamp in the middle of nowhere. There was a thunderstorm coming, there were weird noises coming from the woods, but then they found something in the ground. And what was it? It was a mummified thing. And what was it? It was a mummified plant. Wait, mummified plant? Wait, cut. This script has to be wrong. What does this say? They dug up a mummified plant? How can plants be mummified? Oh yeah, that's what today's Spectacular Science Halloween special is about. Hey listeners, I'm your host Akshay, and in this episode, I'm going to tell you about mummified plants. Well, they're not exactly plant mummies, but they are similar to them. They are plant fossils. In this episode, I'll tell you how they are formed, why they're so important, and what scientists are doing with them now, and the spooky science behind plants' mummies. Let's get right into this amazing science. Oh, it's spooky science too, so make sure to stick around until the end, because we're going to have a great Halloween this year. What are mummified plants and how are they formed? Well, mummified plants, also known as fossilized plants, are plants that have been preserved over millions of years through fossilization. And these plants have been preserved because they've been buried and they've been kind of preserved over these millions of years. And they've been preserved in these rocks. So what you see as a fossil isn't exactly a plant, but it's kind of similar to it because it has the same shape as it. So let's get right into how these plants, fossils, or mummified plants as I like to call them, are formed. Well, these mummified plants are formed first when the plant dies, and this all happens millions of years ago. So you gotta rewind all the way back. When that plant dies, it gets buried in soil and rock. And what's very important is that these plants have to die in an area that has lots of sediment and, most importantly, minerals. So places like tar, clay, and other soil, those are the best places for fossils to form because it slows down a decaying process as it gets buried. When it gets buried under these layers of rocks and sediment and minerals, it starts to decompose eventually and it starts to decay. That's because naturally, when everything dies, it starts to decay and turns back into part of the earth. But what happens is that since it's buried under all of this sediment and rock, the decaying process actually slows down a bit. And once it decays, what starts to happen? There's still a space in that rock or in that soil or in that clay. There's still a space there. And slowly, but surely, minerals start to seep into that area and it starts to fill it up. And those minerals actually harden to turn into rocks. And that's how these plants or fossils are all formed. It's kind of like if you take a piece of modeling clay or even concrete and put your hand or footprint in it, it'll stay there after it's dried out. It kind of preserves it. So that's kind of how these fossils work, except it takes millions of years for these fossils to form because they're buried so deep under them and humans have to dig them up. It's when those minerals go in there, it starts to harden. And what you see as the fossils isn't actually the plant itself. It's just the shape or the imprints of the plant. Now, why do we care about these fossils? Why are they so important? Why are scientists looking for these plant mummies? Well, that's all because they help us understand prehistoric life. Before we get on with some more amazing science facts, I just want to remind you to hit that subscribe button below. It really encourages me and you'll be up to date on all the new episodes. Also, don't forget to leave a like. Thank you so much. Now on to the amazing science facts. You see, humans, compared to the lifespan of the Earth, they only came about later in the time period of the Earth. So before that, we don't know what happened. And how do we know that dinosaurs existed? How do we know that there were different types of plants? How do we know that the continents actually move? That's all thanks to all these fossils. Well, all these fossils that were found in different places, they're mostly plants because plants were very common when the Earth first was home to life. And these plants, they were everywhere. So when these plants die, they turn to fossils. And what scientists can do is they can look at it and they can actually run some tests on it to see what time period it came from and how old that fossil was. And that can help us understand the evolution of life. It can also help us understand the effects of climate change. You see, they can compare leaves of present day trees and plants to the leaves of the fossils, and they can see how climate changes evolved when there wasn't that much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and now when there is. Plant fossils are amazing, and they are so cool to look at and imagine how they formed, and it's just amazing to think about it. Now, before I go trick or treating this amazing Halloween, let's review what we learned in this episode. In this episode, we learned that mummified plants, or plant fossils, are formed when a plant dies and it gets buried in the soil and clay and tar, and it kind of leaves an imprint of it. Over time, minerals seep into that imprint as it starts decaying, and it turns into a fossil, which is kind of the leftover remains of it. And these fossils, they aren't exactly the plant, they're just the imprint of it that's been filled up by rocks. And these fossils are really important to scientists because they can compare it to present day fossils and present day animals to those fossils, and they can find out how life evolved, and it really helps scientists get to the mystery of how life actually formed. It's just amazing to think about all these amazing fossils that may be right below our feet. It's really amazing. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Spectacular Science. Spectacular Science produced and hosted by me, Akshay J. Raman. Our theme song and additional music are by Chan Ramachandran. Please visit my podcast website, spectacularsci.com, to find interactive activities, articles, and blog posts. That's spectacularsci.com. Do you have a science question that you want answered on an episode and get a special shout out? Well, grab an adult and head over to spectacularsci.com/contact. To find a contact form, you can send me all your amazing questions. I'm looking forward to answering your amazing questions on these episodes. Thanks! Also, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening right now. It really encourages me, and you'll be up to date on all the new episodes. Subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Spectacular Science next week. Keep thinking about science.